This chat is going to be a fun one. We're going to talk about unweaving our emotions and thoughts and our past and our present, really building some discernment and how all of these are woven together. This is super important when we start to look at building purpose and meaning in our life, but it's also really important when we want physical health, when we're also wanting to grow spiritually and tap into God's guidance in our life. So let's dive into it. What evidence is showing when it comes to emotions is that they play a huge part in our life. There used to be this narrative that emotions get in the way of our life, and ultimately they interrupt our cognitive understanding and our ability to accomplish goals, and really that they're just a nuisance. That's kind of been the past narrative. But what we're seeing in evidence is some pretty profound things when it comes to emotions. Number one, emotions are something that is an extremely influential part of who we are, to the point where emotions can become trapped in our bodies and ultimately lead to pain and trauma and display themselves in physical manifestations of disease. So it's something that we really can't ignore when we start to recognize that data. However, there's also a challenging dynamic with emotions, in the sense that if we allow ourselves to feel overwhelmed by them and have our life driven by them, that we are left feeling a lot of lack. We are left feeling maybe dissuaded. Perhaps our focus becomes unclear. There's a variety of experiences that one can have when they're overwhelmed by emotions, right? And I think you can see this even just when you start to feel anxious or really sad about something. That feeling is overwhelming. If you've witnessed people go through a really bad breakup, like emotions will completely overrule cognition and understanding, right? Sometimes when we go through challenges in life, it may cognitively make sense, like, oh yeah, I shouldn't feel that way, but we still do. And so it's still something that has to be grappled with, right? And so it can be kind of messy and challenging. And then on top of this, we have the past and the present. There's so many things these days that are voicing, stay in the present moment, focus on the present. Yet, we can become triggered from past experiences. If we've experienced a bad relationship in the past where there was emotional abuse, stepping into a relationship in the present is undoubtedly going to tap into a lot of those past challenges that we will have to face, right? So you can't just separate the past in the sense of, oh, just leave it in the past, you're a new person, it's gone, and move on. It's not that simple, unfortunately. And I so wish it was in my personal journey. I so wish I could leave the past in the past, but inevitably it bleeds into my present life because of my emotional landscape and how those emotions have shaped my understanding of the world. And this is really, this is a great segue into the discussion of past, present, emotional, and cognitions. And so I want to just explore this with you a little bit more. So when we're children, we attempt to make sense of our world. As humans, we are emotional beings. So we connect certain narratives of what we see and what we learn in the world to the emotions we feel at the time, or the emotional challenge we might be going through. So an example is, as a child, if a child has dealt with some sort of abandonment or inconsistency from their parent, they can develop a variety of habits that manage that relationship. The intention and the goal is love and belonging and survival, and love and belonging are a part of that, especially as a child. Connection, right? This is pivotal for childhood development. So in the seeking of that, a child is going to develop patterns and say, okay, for me to have my needs met, I have to watch how my actions are being responded to, right? So if I get upset or frustrated about something and my caregiver is going to disconnect from me, I can't show how I feel. Now, this is key to understand because we still feel the feelings, but now we've received the message. We cannot display them. We cannot talk about them. We cannot show how we feel in fear of a repercussion of abandonment, disconnection, just lack of love and belonging, and ultimately a risk in not surviving. Okay, so we develop this narrative, and then we get older, and these foundational relationships, these initial relationships we had in childhood, it doesn't just go away. That message does not just disappear. Instead, we live our life through childhood, through our teen years, observing the world through this lens. It becomes a part of us. This landscape and scheme of how we see the world actually becomes a part of who we are and how we operate. And so this may manifest itself in a variety of ways. You might have someone who just bottles things up and who, just has learned to put their own emotions on the back burner and people please. Or maybe this person starts to develop the habit of masking. And so, they act one way towards other people, but behind the scenes with another person, they may be very judgmental or saying really mean things about other people. Or if they have a feeling towards someone, they're going to act like everything's fine in front of them and then behind their back disclose how they authentically feel. So they might develop the pattern of masking. So there's all these manifestations, right, that can come up, and it really shapes the landscape of who we are. So our emotions and our mental narrative are just like this. They are completely tied into each other, and they are a huge component of who we are and how we operate. Now, if we're in the present, right, we have a benefit being an adult or having this greater development of consciousness. As you get older, your frontal lobe starts to form and mature. We become a little bit better at, abstract decision making. We can keep into consideration more variables and have a broader sense of focus in our decision making as we get older. And all of this stuff is still evolving until we're at the age of 25. Our brain is still rewiring, maturing, reorganizing itself, and still developing a sense of the world and who we are and how we fit into it. So then we turn 25. We think we know and understand how it all works and where we all fit. And a lot of this stuff is subconscious, right? So it's not until you hit a challenging situation or you hit a challenge in a relationship that these patterns start to manifest themselves. And nowadays you have a lot of this ideology around I need to be loved, I need to be accepted, I want to do what I want, and if a person can't accept me that way, then they can leave. This my way or the highway, love me or leave me kind of attitude. And it fails to recognize that we develop irrational ideologies about life and about relationships because they're formed when we have a child mind. So, we can observe an example of decision making, you wouldn't let an 8-year-old run a company, right? There's certain decision making tasks that you would not leave for an 8-year-old for a variety of reasons. And I want to dive into this a little bit, but there's a variety of reasons, right? When the maturity isn't there, the broad focus isn't there to consider all of the variables that would make effective decisions in that role, right? Not only that, but the ability to manage and tolerate stress is far different between a child and an adult. A child does not have the capacity to effectively make decisions under the pressure that it is all on them, that they have to be independent in making that decision. There's too much pressure in that ultimately for a child because they don't have enough of a sense of the world. And so this is where you can get certain narratives around the world being an unsafe place. And let's be real, there's evil in the world. There are horrible things that people have to endure. And you can't ignore that. And a child does not know how to make sense of that. And so here we are, as humans, adults, there's likely adults listening to this. As humans, as adults, we have these childhood narratives about the world. And then as we get older, what do we notice? We notice more evil. We see more hurt. We see more pain. The longer you live, the more you bleed, right? That's just this essential aspect of life, that there is just challenge and pain. And yes, it sucks and it's unfortunate, but it's inevitable. And so the sooner a child faces that, the more traumatic some of those belief patterns can demonstrate themselves as. So the more trauma can be interlaced into that, simply because they're forced to confront something that is so beyond their understanding of the world. And so they may develop irrational concepts around it just to cope, right? And a lot of these things are: the world isn't safe, I need to withdraw. The world isn't safe, I need to protect. The world isn't safe, I have to avoid. You even see patterns of like disassociation pop up, right? So our brain will literally remove us from being in the present moment if we go through enough trauma. And you see this in a lot of personality disorders. With major trauma, the brain develops ways to cope and protect itself from that mental, emotional, and physical pain. And this is how it manifests. Split personality disorder, for example. There's a handful of cases, not a handful, more than a handful of cases where people are experiencing a lot of trauma that causes this split in personality, and people will develop a type and a facet of their personality to manage and cope with that. And then there's this other part that they click into to just attempt to live a normal life, right? It's very, very fascinating stuff. So emotions and the past is inseparable from the present. Emotions are inseparable from our thought patterns. So now that you've heard me rant about that for the past 14 minutes, how do we address this relationship in a proactive way to live a life filled with meaning, filled with purpose, and ultimately connection to God, connection to the most divine force of our Creator? How does all of this interplay? Well, we have to have, number one, first and foremost, we have to have a healthy relationship with ourselves to ever even attempt to have a healthy relationship with God or the Creator. If we don't know ourselves, we have no idea what cognitive distortions or irrational beliefs or emotionally trauma-led ideologies are shaping our understanding of the world. And if something doesn't fit into that understanding of our world, we're likely going to reject it. So even if it's truth, right? If it doesn't fit in our belief system, we're going to reject it. So you have to know yourself if you're ever going to move into knowing God or having a certain spiritual maturity in your life. There has to be emotional and mental health and emotional and mental maturity taking place. So what would this look like? Well, rather than our emotions being truth, our emotions can be signals to us. So if there's an injustice being done and you have some discord in a relationship, and that person, the actions of that person and the dynamic that comes up hurts our feelings. That's our reaction. Our emotional reaction is hurt and pain from how someone else behaves. Well, we need to start asking questions, okay? It's not practical to point the finger and say, you made me feel this way. We have to look a little bit deeper, okay? Stick with me. If we're pointing the finger and we say, you made me feel this way, we will live our world dependent on everybody else's experience in life in order for us to acquire happiness. If that person dictates us feeling sadness, unfortunately, that person will also dictate when we feel happiness. And that is not an emotionally stable or healthy experience to live in. That is not God's desire for you in this lifetime at all. So how can we look at this? Okay, this person's actions made me feel in this way. We need to start asking questions. Why? Why am I having this emotional response? Well, this person made me feel judged. This person made me feel emotional disconnection. This person didn't meet my expectations. Okay, so now we can identify this person didn't meet these things, so we can realize I put these things on that person. I put the expectation of approval in this person. I put the expectation that this person would treat me in a certain way. I did that. I fixated my internal emotions on the actions of this person. Okay, so we have to start recognizing when we're doing these things. After we do that, we can gain a little bit more control over our emotional impulses. We can start to recognize, okay, I have an emotional impulse to feel rejection when this person doesn't call me back right away or text me back right away. Okay, well, is that a rational belief? Is that a rational thought process to have? No. Okay. So I feel the emotion. You know, what might be a little bit deeper? Well, I'm not feeling a sense of love and belonging. I've invested in this relationship to feel close to this person and they're not reciprocating, right? So I'm love and belonging is not happening or present, and that is a core need as humans. So what could I do then to accomplish this goal of love and belonging? And that opens a whole new conversation, because our sense of love and belonging is then no longer fixated on this individual person. It's fixated on options behind the behaviors we take, behind the choices we choose. Okay, so if I want more love and belonging, what can I do? Well, I could join a Bible study. I could join a yoga class. I'm going to join a cycling club. I'm going to join a forum that talks about fantasy books. You know, we have to get to know ourselves. What is something that would bring a sense of belonging to us? Then as we start to feed and curate that, now our control has been put back into our actions. And sometimes we have to reevaluate. Sometimes, you know, we might take actions and it's like, oh, well, that didn't work. I'm still feeling rejection. You know, I haven't nourished this sense of love and belonging yet. Okay, well, then let's keep going, right? Let's find a new plan. Let's find a new behavior and make some new choices that might more effectively feed that. So we're validating our emotions by witnessing them, knowing that they're real, knowing that they're trying to tell us something. And then we're using our cognitions to paint a better picture of choice and hope. Pivotal. This is necessary to practice on so many levels. Now, I'm sure that there's a handful of people who are going to watch this that don't have challenges like deep post-traumatic stress or anxiety or depression. So the pressure of this process will be less. However, there are people out there that have those deep emotions and have to confront them because it affects their daily lives. So it has to be managed and addressed. And this practice is huge and wildly effective for a variety of emotional and mental challenges. So, yes, acknowledge your emotions, but look deeper into them. Rather than looking at the scene and what's happening around you, ask what's happening inside of you. What does this emotion tell you about yourself? Not necessarily the other person. And this is a radical concept because we're in this society nowadays where it's like, oh, well, I just felt in my intuition that was a bad person. Okay, were they a bad person, or were you emotionally triggered because of some irrational belief developed in your childhood? There's no telling. There is no telling the difference between those two things until you start to get to know yourself, right? So this is huge. Now, how does this play into spirituality? Well, if you start, ultimately, if you start engaging and trying to curate a relationship with God, God is going to communicate to you through the world around you, and it is extremely interactive. If you build a relationship with the living God, you will have incredible coincidences and harmonies and just bizarre happenstance that comes up in your life. And you'll listen to people talk and it's like they're talking directly to your soul, but it's God speaking to you through other people. It's God working for you through other people. And this is the beauty of us bringing God into our life, because we also get to play a part of that, right? When we work to bring God into our life, then we can start speaking and talking and supporting other people and sharing our testimony with other people. And you never know who it's going to speak directly to and who it's going to impact. And that is God using you to speak to someone else. And we get to witness God's glory in that way. And it's amazing. There's deeper purpose and meaning that God has envisioned for us. God created you for a very specific reason, and that is for greatness. And the question is, how do we tap into that, right? Now, we got to get to know ourselves and understand where we are standing in our own way, where our own perceptions are veiling us from seeing God in our world, from seeing God in our circumstance. What is holding us back from seeing God's hand directly in our life? And it's often ourselves. It's not other people. It's ourselves that are standing in the way of seeing God's hand in our life and seeing God in our world. So as we develop a clear mind, we start to notice where there's distortion happening in how we perceive our world and how we perceive our emotions. We can then start to see God's nature a little bit more clearly. We can then start to learn an objective God that is outside of our subjective thoughts about how life should be or how something should work. And this is the crazy thing about God. God is beyond everything we see and know at this point in time. Now, science is amazing because science is uncovering so much about God. There is so many harmonies with the biblical God and what science is showing. There are so many things in science that we're learning that is pointing to God, which is amazing when initially it was like this discussion of science versus God, right? Which is totally not what we're seeing right now. In today's day and age, we live in an incredible day and age. We get to see so many harmonies between science and God. But we have to be able to look We have to be able to clarify our muddied, blurred perception of the world and how the world works in order to even see that stuff. So I hope that this conversation, really maybe inspires you to think and reflect a little bit more deeply about that emotional relationship with yourself and how your emotions are impacting your cognitions, but ultimately how we can use our cognition to impact and care for our emotions. It's not emotions versus thoughts. They are together. They're a system. And if we know how to crack that system, we can open up incredible emotional and mental health for ourselves and really grow into the greatest divine purpose that God has in store for us. And that's my prayer for you today. I hope you enjoyed this chat. Leave me a comment if you have any questions or points of discussion. I'd love to hear it.